Well, thanks very much. I'm going to talk about koala management on Kangaroo Island. I'm going to give a bit of background for people that haven't heard the story before. I'm going to talk about the population increase, some of the reasons why we've had a population increase and what we're doing about it. So just a bit of background, koalas aren't native to Kangaroo Island. They were introduced in the 1920s and down in the western end of the island at Flinders Chase National Park. And impacts were evident within 20 years. There were various attempts to translocate them to other parts of the island, to the Dudley Peninsula in the 1940s. That wasn't successful, and we're still trying to keep them out of Dudley Peninsula. But the translocation in the 1950s to the Cygnet River was successful, and that's now one of our highest density populations. Just looking for it. Oh, yeah, I won't attempt that then. And why are we concerned about increases in koala abundance? It's the overbrowsing. So when you get large numbers of koalas in an area where they've been introduced, they sometimes tend to overbrowse the vegetation on favoured food trees. It results in tree death because they don't stop eating the leaves off the tree. Tree can't photosynthesise, and you get widespread tree death. This is down in Flinders Chase National Park. I can't point because then it will upset the... Oh, here we go. It's a manna gum stand down at Flinders Chase National Park from overbrowsing. So, because of widespread community concern about the overabundance of koalas, the tree death on Kangaroo Island, in 1996, a task force was set up to advise to the Minister of what we're going to do about overbrowsing and overabundance of koalas on Kangaroo Island. The task force recommended culling as the most cost-effective approach to reduce koala densities, followed up with sterilisation to maintain them at a low level. This was rejected by the community as a management approach. There was a lot of media, there was a lot of community concern, not Kangaroo Island community. It was more the rest of Australia and overseas concern with culling koalas. So the second recommended option of sterilisation was adopted. And now culling's not permitted in any state in Australia, not permitted under the National Koala Conservation and Management Strategy. So sterilisation's our option at the moment to reduce koala fertility control. We're not planning on wiping out koalas on the island. We never intended to eradicate them. We're just trying to get them down to a sustainable density. We estimate that's around 0.75 koalas per hectare, above which we start seeing overbrowsing on the vegetation. So we're trying to manage them out of density. I'm not going to be talking about tree condition monitoring or the habitat restoration work which we've been doing. I'm going to be focusing on the sterilisation and koala abundance. So since the project began in 1996, we've sterilised over 12,700 koalas on the island, and of those we've relocated back to their historic range in the southeast of the state, 3,800. It's cost about $8.6 million. It employs about 10 staff each year for about 5 months over a year over summer to do the koala catching. We use surgical sterilisation. It's a permanent technique. It's a 5-minute tubal ligation operation, which the vet on Kangaroo Island performs. We catch koalas through the arborist method. We hold them in pens until surgery day, and then they're released at the point of capture. So what's been happening to the density of koalas? So at the start of the we've got mean density of koalas on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. So back at the start of the program in 1996, we had an average density in this area, which is our high density area, of about 3 koalas per hectare. We saw a lot of sterilisation occur and then translocation, and we saw the population steadily decline. Things were working well. And in 2010, we thought, this is great. We got below our sustainable density for that area. So things were going well, but then all of a sudden, density started to increase. and this is quite a significant increase just in the last 5 years. Looking at it like that, it doesn't look as bad as what it was back then, and it's not as bad as what it was back in 1996, but this is a significant increase in koalas, which we're concerned about, and when you extrapolate that over a large area of the island, that's a lot more koalas that are increasing, and we know that they can double in number every 4 years, so we want to do something about it. But just looking at what are some of the factors that might have caused this population increase? We don't know for sure anything, but we know there's probably 4 or 5 most likely culprits. We know our sterilisation rate is related to funding. How many we sterilise directly related to funding, and we know there are political decisions and so on, with increases in funding, declines, increases and so on. But for the last 5 years, our sterilisation rate has been fairly low compared to some of our previous sterilisation rates, and fairly steady. We know we stopped translocation in 2010, so we stopped shipping koalas off the island. We know we had a drought around this time in 2006-07. We had low rainfall for quite a few years, which probably contributed to some of this decline here. And we know that koalas on Kangaroo Island, there's a reduction in breeding during drought. We had somebody doing a PhD student that time, and he was seeing a reduction in breeding. And we know that since that time we've had good environmental conditions, lots of rain, we haven't had a drought, so there's nothing controlling their breeding in that sense. So it's probably contributing to it. One of the other big things is blue gum plantations. We've had 15,000 hectares of blue gum plantations planted on the island. We estimate they became habitat about 2008, so around that 2010 mark, because most of them were planted in the early 2000s, and within a few years they're available habitat. We know that we've done some monitoring in the blue gum plantations on Kangaroo Island. We know that the koala densities in the plantations are higher than our high quality native vegetation, and that they're breeding up in the plantations. So there are unmanaged populations in these 15,000 hectares of blue gums that are breeding up. We're managing the native veg. It's very hard to catch koalas in blue gum plantations, so there hasn't been a lot of work in that space, but we did, a couple of years ago, we did trial a whole lot of methods. And so it is possible to catch koalas and sterilise in the plantations, but it's very expensive. So I talked about drought and areas subject to management. We're getting an increasing number of landholders restricting access for koala management. And so there's a lot of different reasons for that. A lot of people, so some people on the island say, why aren't we culling? We're wasting their money. We should be culling. They won't let us on if we're only going to sterilise. Some people won't let us on if we don't move the koalas off, but of course we can't move the koalas to somebody else's property or to a park. We can't move them around because that just exacerbates the problem. But there's other reasons people won't let us on properties, tourism, they think we've got koalas too low and they want tourists to come onto their properties and see koalas. There's a lot of different reasons, and some people are just anti-government. If they get a parking fine, then we won't be able to come on and do koala management. So that's only a relatively small part of it though, because normally we can manage around a property. If they don't allow us on, we do a boundary and catch koalas all around their property, sterilise around their property, but it's only when you get the big properties joining together that it's more of an issue. And then you get the pockets breeding up, like in the blue gum plantations. Population estimate. So we estimated there are about 27,000 koalas in the native veg back in 2000. This is an island-wide survey, 100 sites, double counts. We did the survey again in 2006. Population had reduced to about 16,000, down to 13,000 in 2010. But in that 5 years between 2010 and 2015, the population estimate shot back up again. Just to show the story on blue gum plantations, this is property. Baloo is koalas caught. So the catch team went onto these plantations. These are plantations down the southwest of Kangaroo Island. That there is native veg, a lot of native veg in the plantations on Kangaroo Island, and we've always managed in the native veg in the plantations. It's just a snapshot of an example. It's only one little area, but it tells a bit of a story. So this is the number of koalas the catch team saw and caught in 2013 on these two plantations. Then in 2015, 2 years later, same technique, same number of people went back on that property and caught that many koalas for sterilisation. If you're the landholder in the middle between these two plantations, so these are plantations, these three around here, this landholder is surrounded by plantations, and outside of that are restricted access properties, and then they've got a park in here. So he's tearing his hair out because he's getting koalas building up on his property. That was the number of koalas caught in 2008. Went the wrong way. So, and that's the number that was caught in 2015 on his property. So the population estimate I mentioned was around 26,000 in the native veg in 2000, and it's only a little bit less now in 2015. And we've had the blue gum plantations established, and we're estimating around 24,000 in the blue gum plantations. So we've got a population estimate of around 48,000. However, it's not all without hope, taking from those other talks. We don't have the really high densities we used to have, so we're not seeing tree death everywhere. We're seeing the population spread out, and we're seeing it spread into the plantations, but we're not seeing the really high density, because at the moment we've got enough budget to sterilise those high density places to stop them getting too high that we start to see tree death and impacts on the koalas. So there is hope, because over half the population is still below that sustainable density. It's not, the whole population isn't at really high density. And so what are we doing about it? Well, we're trying to get more funding to increase our sterilisation rate. But we're also trying to address key knowledge gaps. So we had people looking at the relationship between tree condition and koala density. We want to know whether that 0.75 applies to all the different tree types, or whether it's just manna gum. Does the stringy bark, for example, tolerate much higher densities? Can we let them go a little bit more before we step in and manage them? We've got people like Tom Prowse and Steve Deline working on a spatial model to investigate the population size and help with management strategies. So with the koala population model, they're going to be able to tell us where we can put our management in the landscape and get best value for the money that we spent. So where is it most dire to be managing in the first instance? We had somebody looking at koala movements and habitat use, and that was important just to know, like immigration rates. So if we manage in an area, how long before it takes for other koalas to move back in. And the good news from that work was that they are relatively, they don't move very much. So the rate of immigration was not that high. We're exploring other management options as well. We're at the moment looking at whether we can modify the hormone implant technique, which they're using in Victoria. They anaesthetise the koala, they use a vet, and they put a hormone implant in. We're looking at whether we can syringe a hormone implant in and therefore not anaesthetise the koala, and therefore the koala could be brought down, little injection, koala goes back up the tree. If we can get there with the technology, and it's quite possible, then it'll be a lot cheaper exercise and we can do it a lot more widespread. So we're working on that at the moment with Zoos SA and University of Adelaide. We've also worked with University of Adelaide looking at drones, whether drones can be used. It's so hard to count koalas in blue gum plantations. So they did a project looking at whether drones and how accurate drones were for counting koalas, and they worked well. That's just what happens in hormone implants in Victoria. So the way forward, well, there are political constraints in managing an iconic species. There's a limit to what we can do. But what we are doing in the Environment Department, we are taking a statewide approach to koala management. So we've got issues in a lot of areas, not just Kangaroo Island, but we're using learnings from Kangaroo Island and other areas across the landscape. So we're sharing learnings. We've got a group that meets once a month, sharing learnings of what koala management we're doing in our regions. We're also sharing learnings with the Victorians because they're a little bit more advanced than us in terms of koala densities. They're a lot higher, so they've got some good information on what they're doing about that. And basically a whole of agency and community approach moving forward. Thank you.